Nyck de Vries is the type of driver which you don't really see in modern F1. The natural path for most F1 drivers is for them to compete in the lower formula, like F3 and then F2, and then they either make it into Formula 1, or that's it. To get into Formula 1 requires so much to go right. You've got to have the talent and success in the junior formula, you've also got to have the money or a team backing you at the right time, and then even if you have all of that, timing and luck still plays a huge part in terms of a seat actually being available. The window of opportunity to be an F1 driver is narrow at best, and for Nyck de Vries it really did look like it was just a case of the right driver but at the wrong time. And yet, in 2022, seemingly overnight, de Vries went from a driver who no one really knew much about before Monza, to then being a driver which 3 different teams were all trying to sign for 2023. De Vries throughout his career has been a serial winner and early on was in the same class of drivers like Leclerc, Norris, Albon and Russell. He was actually a McLaren young driver going all the way back to 2012, but in the 4 years that he spent in Formula 3 and Formula 2, whilst he was always a very good driver, he was never the outstanding talent, seeing other McLaren drivers like Magnussen, Van Dorn and Norris make it into Formula 1 before him. In his rookie GP3 season, which at the time was the F3 equivalent, he finished 6th in his rookie season, winning 2 races, with Charles Leclerc going on to win the title. In the 3 seasons that he then spent in Formula 2, he would finish 7th, winning 1 race in 2017, and then in 2018, which was the season that included Russell, Norris and Albon, who all went on to race in Formula 1 the following year, he would finish 4th, just behind all of them, with 3 race wins. By 2019, he had now parted with McLaren, and ironically, this would be the season in which he would finally win the Formula 2 championship. It was a dominant season as he beat Nicholas Latifi by 52 points, but the mere fact that it was Latifi who was the runner-up that year should tell you that it was a much weaker grid. Now, don't get me wrong, winning a Formula 2 championship under any circumstances is one of the biggest things that you can achieve in motorsport, but because it was a much weaker grid, in combination with the fact that it also took de Vries 3 years to win the title, kind of ruled him out of any F1 drives for 2020. Even though the chance to get into Formula 1 just seemed to come and go for Nyck, for 2020 he would join the Mercedes Formula E team, where in 3 seasons he would go on to win the 2021 Formula E title. In between the single-seater success, he also competed in sports cars, racing at the Le Mans 24-hour, finishing just off the podium in 4th in the LMP2 class. And he is also a race winner in the World Endurance Championship, winning the 6 Hours of Fuji in 2019. All of this success, and especially the Mercedes relationship, meant that in 2022, when Formula 1 teams were required to run a younger driver in 2 practice sessions over the course of the season, for all of the Mercedes-powered teams, Nyck de Vries was kind of the go-to option. Now, keep in mind that this isn't really what the regulation to run a younger driver is there to do. Nyck de Vries is 27 years old, but for the teams to have to run younger drivers was almost a nuisance, especially at the risk in a cost cap era of a driver crashing and costing the team valuable money and also spare parts. That is why for the Mercedes-powered teams, de Vries represented a driver who would fulfill the criteria to run a quote-unquote younger driver, but as an experienced driver he would just come in, do a professional job, and that would be that. He would make his FP1 debut for Williams in Spain, then for Mercedes in France, and then also for Aston Martin at Monza. In fact, in Sao Paulo, he almost completed the Mercedes Power Unit Infinity Gauntlet, because when Lando Norris was rumored to be suffering from food poisoning, de Vries was on standby and also had a seat fit, just in case the team needed him as well. However, before Monza, at no point was anyone talking about de Vries being in the running for any seat in 2023. For 2022, it was rumored that Williams were choosing between Albon and de Vries, but after that went Albon's way, it really did seem like that was the last chance for Nyck. Of course, everything changed at Monza. When Alex Albon was ruled out of the 2022 Italian Grand Prix, Nyck de Vries was already there with Aston Martin that weekend, and Williams, having already run him in the car in Spain, knew that Nyck would be a safe pair of hands. He would outqualify Latifi, finishing in P13, which for the race would turn into a starting spot of P8 after all of the engine penalties that weekend. Then in the race he would do the thing that Latifi had failed to do all season long, and scored points in his debut race, finishing in P9. This was a weekend where the Williams genuinely had pace on a track where its flaws were masked by the characteristics of Monza, so it wasn't as if de Vries was transcending the car. He had just done the job that Latifi should have been doing all season long. Just like that, after one stand-in performance, de Vries would become a completely different driver in terms of perception. He had gone from the very nearly man and the driver who was more joked about for being the plug-in driver for multiple different teams, to a driver who Williams obviously wanted to replace Latifi with. Alpine also wanted him as an alternative to Gasly if they couldn't get him, and then in the end it was AlphaTauri and the Red Bull program who finally bagged him despite having a plethora of junior drivers in Formula 2. I'm not quite sure that I have ever seen the narrative change around a driver and an overnight transformation quite like de Vries had during the Italian Grand Prix. That brings us to where we are now. De Vries is a very unique driver going into his rookie F1 season, and the last time we saw a driver who took arguably a similar longer route into F1 was probably Brendan Hartley in 2018. And in my opinion, Hartley actually did a much better job than most people give him credit for. De Vries comes in as a very intriguing driver. He has been a race winner in pretty much every category that he's ever raced in, and a champion in Formula E and Formula 2. But he is also a driver who can be inconsistent. It says a lot that his championship-winning FE campaign was during the chaotic COVID-hit season, where the top 5 drivers were separated by 10 points in the championship, and that in the previous Formula E season, which was the first one to go back to normal, his teammate Stoffel van Dorn, who won the championship, was easily the quicker and more consistent driver. Having said that, F1 is a clean slate for him, and having that experience of driving for the factory Mercedes team means that he's also got the experience and maturity of a much older driver, having worked for a top team where the pressure is always high. And when it comes to the topic of experience, in the modern age of F1 with how restricted testing is, there is no one who has driven more 2022 F1 cars than Nyck de Vries. He has driven the Williams both in practice and during a Grand Prix. He has driven the Mercedes twice in France and Mexico. He drove the Aston Martin during FP1 in Monza, and he has also driven the AlphaTauri during the postseason test in Abu Dhabi. What I'm really interested to see is what kind of rookie de Vries will be, and if he will actually perform better and be better off as a late starter with the wealth of motorsport experience in comparison to if he had gotten into F1 in 2019 or 2020 as a much younger and more inexperienced rookie. His teammate Yuki Tsunoda is almost the perfect counterpart. Yuki made it into F1 very early, and it was very obvious in 2021 that it was probably too early. He's openly admitted that he misjudged the physical demands of F1, the driving demands of the cars, and it's meant that even going into his 3rd season, Yuki's future is far from certain. Unlike Yuki, Nyck definitely won't underestimate the demands and pressure of what it takes to perform at the highest level of motorsport, and I think that will help him jump some of the hurdles that younger, less mature drivers usually get tripped up by in their rookie seasons. But will he have the outright raw speed to outperform Yuki in his 3rd season that perhaps he didn't quite have as a younger driver to make it in F1 in the first place? That's just one of many questions that will make Nyck de Vries one of the most interesting drivers to watch.